Afternoon, and welcome to this Refinitiv webinar about modeling the energy transition. I'm Gabriel Martinelli, and I'm managing the European Power Research Team here at Refinitiv. And together with me today is Natalie, who is a senior analyst in the team. And yes, we have started this journey about energy transition in the Refinitiv Power Research Group last year. We have launched the model last year, and now I'm gonna first remind you and present a bit our long-term power market model, and then Natalie will show how to use this model also in the short term. So talking in particular about the challenges in the winter 22-23 and the need of gas for power, how that's affected by different risks and scenarios. And then I will be taking you through the power flexibility needed in 2030. So we'll move to the long term, and finally we'll close with some remarks and summary. So let's jump straight in. We have a lot of content to cover. So as I mentioned, we started this content last year, and we have this tab in Icon, which is where you can find our content. The energy transition model is a long-term version of our forward price model, which at the moment covers 8 countries. So it covers roughly 2/3 of EU27 plus UK. And here in the main menu on the left, you find all the input and output, and you can dig it in detail in monthly resolution, and all the results are available also in hourly resolution for those of you that want to dig it even more in detail, like we will do in this presentation. So the model is a stack-based model, which essentially takes the renewable generation scenarios from the 30 weather years from 91 to 2020, and the same for demand scenarios, and then uses thermal and nuclear viabilities and calculate short-run marginal cost plant by plant for the countries covered, using fuel and carbon prices based on the market forward curves. It solves basically the dispatch problem, the generation dispatch problem in hourly resolution, emulating in a way what the Euphemia algorithm does for the day ahead, for calculating a day ahead price. And actually it runs in blocks of weeks, because we take into account startup costs for thermal plants. So that's why it takes a bit longer than normal dispatch model to run, and we run it in hourly resolution for all these weather scenarios once a month. So you find new result every month, first Saturday of the month. And the output are spot prices, capture prices, flows, generation by type, emissions, fuel burns. And as implicit output, we have also the future need for flexibility, because basically this is not a capacity model, this is a dispatch model. So we model the dispatch with the stack which we have now, and which we know will happen. So with the renewable targets, the coal and lignite and nuclear decommissioning, which we know. And then we will see if we manage to meet the demand or not for each individual hour, for each individual weather scenarios. And based on that, we calculate the need for flexibility, which we will also discuss more in detail in this presentation. So just to set the stage, so probably these are information that you know, but as in terms of macro trend, the current version of the model is the one that doesn't include the expansion which was proposed yesterday, actually. So we have actually run a scenario on that, we will present later in this presentation. But at the moment, the assumption of the model are a bit more conservative, which versus the plan that was presented, the detailed plan that was presented yesterday by the European Commission in the second version of the Repower EU. And so per current model, we have obviously that the installed wind and solar still more than doubles by the end of 2030. For wind, we go from 160 gigs to 290 gigs in the countries we cover, and for solar, we go from 120 gigs to 300 gigs. Now, yesterday, European Commission set a target of 600 gigs for the entire European Union, corresponding roughly to 400 gigs for the countries which we cover in the model at the moment, a bit more than that. And we will see later. We have a scenario actually on that, because that was already in the cards since 2 months basically. So, but at the moment, the base case is still having the renewable target which you see on screen. And when it comes to the thermal capacity development, well, we know that several countries, not only Germany, which is in blue here, but several other countries are proposing rapid or less rapid decommissioning of their coal fleet. And same for lignite for Germany. And actually, in these two countries, only Poland, out of the countries at the moment in the model, will still rely relatively heavily on that up to 2030. When it comes to the gas fleet, we have an increase, kind of relatively slow increase of the gas fleet in some of the countries, and relatively stable in several other countries. You find all the details in the model in Icon. And for nuclear, actually, that's very stable. We have, particularly the French fleet, which is the one in light blue, which is relatively stable. We have only one new commissioning at the moment planned. And then we have some new commissioning in Britain. And the rest of the fleet is relatively stable, with some decommissioning in Belgium, which was actually postponed after the Ukraine war. So relatively stable fleet, and obviously Germany is the one in blue, will phase out the last nuclear asset at the end of the year. So this is the base for the current modeling, and I will leave now the stage to Natalie to discuss the outlook for the coming winter before taking it again. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me jump right into this winter. What do we see price-wise for the power markets that we cover, and also where do we see the demand for gas to power this winter? So what you can see here is our base case in red. That is our price forecast on a monthly basis for this winter. Against that, you see the current market traded price in the black dashed curve. As you can see, we are bearish towards the market. We see that the market is currently pricing in a quite high risk premium compared to what we see as the fundamental price level. The risk premium for, especially now for this winter, we consider it justified, and there's enough factual and large risks inherent for this winter. That is specific to things. We see the justified worry about the gas supply in this winter, which of course also affects gas to power on one side. On the other side, the worries are also extremely strong when it comes to the nuclear power availability in France in this winter, which according to what we see in the remits, and that is pictured here in the red curve, the availability will be rather low this winter. We are counting right now with around 43 gigawatts of capacity. What we also expect is that the availability will be lower than what is currently announced in remits, and therefore we scale down the remit availability by a certain factor to account for more unexpected unavailabilities and also extensions of outages. And therefore, that is in our model, and it's probably also priced into the market price. But if there's a stronger risk premium on the market price, it's probably because the market fears that there could be even more outages. So when it comes to the gas the gas burn forecast that we have. We've done a lot of analysis on this since March, really driven the focus to what we expect to be the demand from the power sector for this winter. First of all, we have to remind ourselves that what we consider to be the baseload capacity in Germany, which is nuclear, lignite, and coal, we see that by end of the year, both the finalization of the nuclear phase out, so 4 gigawatt of nuclear capacity leaving the market, and also the next steps of the coal phase out, as it is the plan as of now. So instead of 35 gigawatt of baseload capacity, we moved to 28, and this shift will materialize in a higher gas burn. In our outlook, at the moment, we have 6.2 gigawatt hour per hour in Q4, and then after the phase out is finalized in Q1, we have a higher demand for, a higher burn of gas-fired power of around 7.7 on average. So everything I've said now is average values. Here's where we average out the forecast that we get for each weather year that we actually model. And if we want to look into what the specific weather years say and how much of a range around these averages they give us, we see the following. We see that, first of all, our forecast for this winter here in the red line is higher than in the previous 2 years, in the previous 2 winters. That is one thing that we already saw previously, and also what we see here is basically the monthly possible maximum and possible minimum gas burn in each of the winter months. So, for example, in January, and now we can also convert this directly into BCM of gas demand, which in our forecast is around 9 BCM. The range just for the January gas burn, if in January we see a deviation up to very bullish weather, I mean bullish weather means low wind speeds or eventually cold weather, we see that a bullish January alone could increase the total gas burn by 1 BCM. Or conversely, if you had strong wind speeds and relatively mild weather in February, you could end up having 1.1 BCM less gas to power demand in Germany only for that 1 month. So it shows that if there's just in 1 or 2 months a deviation from the normal, that the sensitivity of the gas burn to that is very strong. So, and this is just the lower right chart shows you how we present this on icons. So we do actually show for each month how the different weather years would result, which gas to power demand would result from the different weather years. Then now what I showed previously is for the monthly view. Now we can look into the quarterly view, which is a higher aggregation level, but also interesting to see that for Q4, here to the left, and Q1, the average gas burn forecast that we have is, or all the gas burn forecasts, independent of which weather year you look at, they will, even the most bearish quarters will be having almost the same or higher gas burn than in the previous 2 years for both of the quarters observed. Good. As it comes to German to exports, and we're focused on Germany again, we are expecting, or basically we have been expecting Germany to turn from net exporter to net importer around this time, now that the nuclear phase out is in the final steps. But what we've been seeing in the last 1 or 2 years is that this move, or this flip from net exporter to net importer has been postponed. We also see it postponed beyond this winter. No matter what weather year we're looking at, we expect that because of the relative cost of coal being so much cheaper than gas, that really favors German coal and lignite-fired power, and it results in Germany overall being a net exporter for almost all the winter months and also for almost all the weather years applied. Good. So now, for this winter, we prepared a scenario called the Recession Scenario. So here we wanted to look at what would happen if we see a recession in Germany, whether that's due to the high gas and energy prices in general, or because there might be a gas flow stop from Russia, which would result in some rationing of gas specifically for the industry. We wanted to look at what this would mean for our forecast. We don't really have a proper assessment or cannot really say how much lower gas demand or lower gas supply would result in for the power demand. But we took one reference year that most of us still remember very well, the crisis year 2009, where we observed a demand drop of 5 to 6%. Which was mostly in the industry sector, so affecting the base load and not so much the heating demand and the peak demand, and wanted to see what we would see in the winter 22 if we had another power demand drop of 5%. We apply this reduction of demand for all the countries modeled, and in the case of Germany, that means a reduction in every single hour of 2.8 gigawatts. The price impact of this scenario would be on our base case price, which is around 230 euro per megawatt hour. We see a reduction of around 16 euros, so that is roughly 7% lower prices. We see that in the more in the month with the highest price range, which is January, that the price impact is also a bit higher and leads to minus 25 euro per megawatt hour. That is for the power prices. Now, if we look again on the gas burn, we see that this 5% lower power demand results in a roughly proportional reduction of the gas demand of 4.7%. Now, if you convert this back into BCM, a reduction of 5% of the gas burn means roughly 0.4 BCM of gas. And now again, if we remind ourselves how the possible range of gas burn is in every single month, just based on possible weather variability, this is actually not as much as of risk for the gas to power demand as the weather variability. And also, we've been doing quite a lot of studies in analysis back in March on proposals of, okay, how can we substitute gas by eventually bringing back all the already decommissioned coal plants that would temporarily run to replace some gas-fired power. And what we learned from doing all these sensitivities is that the reduction potential, even of drastic measures like returning 5 gigawatt of coal plants, also has an impact of around 0.4 BCM, not even 1 BCM. So once again, we learned that the weather variability is the actual main risk factor to look out for, even when we compare it to quite drastic, demand and supply scenarios as we've done here. Good. So now I'm going to move to our long-term view. We're going to look at mainly the year 2030. I'm going to introduce into the scenarios that we developed, and then Gabriele is going to talk about the implications and the results. So first of all, let me present the base case. Our base case forecast that we computed early this month is presented here in red. So this is our base case scenario up until 2030. And as you can see, the prices are decreasing, which for which one key reason is that we, just as much as we see the backwardation here in prices, we also have declining coal and gas prices over time. Here, as Gabriela already mentioned, we don't have our own view on fuel prices. We really apply what the market is trading at the moment. And therefore, we see this decline. So seeing that, and in the attempt of filtering out for the effect of fuel prices, we wanted to look at what our base case would be if we would correct for this backwardation, this downward development of fuel prices, and just keep the 2023 prices constant beyond 2023. So basically applying the same prices in all the years beyond. So what we see is, first of all, and it's also shown here in the SRMCs for coal versus gas, that coal is relatively cheaper compared to gas in the historical comparison. And that's why right now we have coal capacity being maxed out because it's relatively cheaper. So if we kept that relation, which in 2023, according to current forward prices is still the case, we would in 2030, and this is shown here in the generation mix bars, still have the incentive to burn more coal and less gas as compared to the base case. So this is a bit for us to learn about what the impact of fuel prices is. We also have prepared, this is just a view on also on the other countries and how the renewable energy mix and the share on demand would develop over time. And we see here that while for Great Britain and Spain, we're reaching levels close to 70, 80% of demand. For Germany, the share of wind, solar, and hydro in 2030, if we keep the assumptions as here in the base case, would be around 55%. Good. Okay, so now we get to our alternative scenarios. First of all, electrification. So for electrification, we have our base case, which is at the moment still a bit more conservative. We see a continuation of energy efficiency gains leading to reduced demand, and only by mid-decade we believe that the total power demand will be impacted and will be more electrified, and that the electrification will overcompensate energy efficiency gains. That is in our base case at the moment and depicted here in orange. While we wanted to have a look at what our model would deliver with a higher electrification scenario in which we're increasing the target for 2030 by 15%. So we expect 15% higher demand in 2030, and we have a path going there up from our base case in 2023. The final energy demand in that year would also be comparable to what we see in the 10-year development plan from LSEG of this year, at around 585 terawatt hours per year. So that is one scenario. The next scenario is we call it early coal phase out in 2030, which is nothing really new. It's actually was one of the main discussion points before the beginning of the war. The idea of phasing out coal and lignite in Germany not by 2035, but rather earlier, by the year 2030. And while at the moment we're rather discussing about other topics and trying to replace gas with all means possible, and also by coal and lignite, we believe that by 2030 this topic will be back on the table, and it's also something likely to happen that actually this coal phase out year could be moved forward. At least that was the intention up until February. So while it's not discussed yet, we don't think it's off the table. And we wanted to have a look at what happens if we change from the phase out path that you see here in the base case in blue, which goes further up until 2038, to have a more a faster phase-out path, which would result in the year 2030 to only have 5 gigawatt of coal and lignite capacity left over. That is 5 gigawatts compared to 16 gigawatt that we have in the base case. Okay, and last but not least, renewable energy boost, which relates to the news from yesterday from the new Repower EU proposal. We had a look at what the current German proposal, which is dates back to Easter this year, in which it has been proposed, not decided yet, but proposed to double the solar target from 100 gigawatt to 215 by 2030, and also more than 50% higher wind target at 145. So we wanted to apply this so-called Easter package and see what the world in 2030 would be like. If we use this renewable boost scenario only, we see that the impact on the generation is, of course, more wind and solar power, less but not zero coal and gas power, as you see here in the generation mix 2030. And also important to note, if that was the case, then we would also have Germany being a net exporter basically for all the time until 2030. So still in 2030, Germany would be net exporting. Also, the bottom left chart shows for all the scenarios mentioned what the renewable energy share would be in the mix, and this renewable boost only, if we only had that, would result in 90% renewable energy share. This would be the overview of the scenarios. I've mentioned base case flat fuels, electrification, and renewable boost. We did those scenarios as a single event. If only that the electrification was added to our base case, then this would be our very bullish price path that you see here in orange, whereas renewable energy boost only would be this very strong downward sloping curve here in green. So we consider these two as the extreme scenarios and have chosen to also combine the elements to do a renewable boost plus early coal phase out scenario, which you see here in blue, and in purple. And we've also combined the increasing electrification with also a renewable energy boost. So while we learn a lot from the electrification and renewable energy boost scenarios about how stressed the system would become, we think that the combination scenarios come closer to what we will have, to what our base case will be moving to already in this year. So I'll leave you with the overview of the prices, and now Gabriele will move over to more of the details.
Yes. So yeah, as Natalie said, now we have this new package from yesterday, which we have tried to incorporate, as she said, in this electrification plus renewable boost scenario. So this will really become most likely the new base case, which all of us will have to do, to face going forward, because the targets from yesterday are relatively clear. They're not clear at detailed country level, but they are relatively clear in terms of goals. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the goal of reaching 600 gig solar capacity in 2030 and 320 in 2025. This is very clear that there is a lot of focus on solar because of the relatively rapid deployment, and both in terms of permission and in terms of supply chain. While for wind, the path is more similar to what to the path that was previously presented. So there are not so clear goals when it comes to wind, but still some countries, especially, and we have that in the model, like UK, have a lot of support on especially wind offshore technology going towards 2030. And then we have obviously target on energy consumption, saving heat pumps. That's why we believe this scenario with renewable boost plus electrification will be the new base case. And finally, there is targets also on hydrogen, which will become relevant when we talk about curtailment and excess of renewables. So let's start to dive into the result of the model. So I will first present you the result in terms of coal and gas generation, and then I will move to the flexibility needed. So as Natalie said, in the base case scenario, we will have 8 gigs of coal and 8 gigs of lignite in January 2030 in Germany. I will present most of the results still for Germany, but I will also look at other countries and discuss a bit other countries. But basically, what happens in Germany affects a lot of other countries. So you can see here in the chart the utilization on average of the coal and lignite fleet in a tight month, which is the month of January, which we will use later on in the presentation as an example month. So you can see here the variability across the weather years. So in the base case, we have quite a lot of variability between the bullish years, which is the one where we get utilization very close to the actual average available. So remember that the average installed is 16 gig. We will have an average availability of around 14.5, 15 gigs. So that's learned from historical availability. And in the electrification only scenario, you will see a more uniform distribution. Okay, so a higher need for base load. And on the opposite side, when you add the renewables, you see a more dispersed view. So here the dispersion between the difference between the bullish years and the bearish year increase a lot versus the base case. But still, what you immediately see is that in the most bullish years, you will still need to utilize almost in full the existing base load capacity for some of these bullish years. And this is what you really learn. So because these are years where in January you probably have very little wind, and so there you are very reliant on that. So even if you install more renewables, that's not going to help you that much. And this is really the dispersion here is increasing, but the most bullish years don't change. And then you can expect, okay, if I phase out 10 out of these 16 gigs, then are you going to utilize the fleet all the time? And that's not true, because you still have the windy hours where you basically need zero base load. I mean, close to zero base load. I mean, because of the amount of wind which will be installed under this renewable boost scenario by 2030. So basically the idea is that you still don't utilize the fleet in full for the bearish years, because these will be the average between hours where you utilize 10 or 15 gigs of base load and hours where you utilize zero. So if you don't have 15 gigs, then you will have the average between hours where you utilize 5 and hours where you utilize 0. So that will result in 2 or 3 gigs, but not in the full utilization on average. So this is something that we learn. It seems counterintuitive, but actually is perfectly intuitive. I mean, and this is the testimony of how much the individual hours are different, and this is where we will go in the discussion later on. And so next we have looked at gas-fired generation. So first we have looked at the entire 2030. So we have first measured how many hours we'll need as a generation, a gas fleet larger than 10 gigs under the different weather scenarios. And second, we have looked how much hours we get a generation larger than 15 gigs, still in Germany under the different weather scenarios. And you can see that in the base case, you have this going towards 40%, which obviously increase in the electrification scenario. But the interesting thing is that even under renewable boost, you still get, under renewable boost scenarios, you still have a non-negligible amount of hours, because this is 5% of the hours. This is range between 4 and 7%. So across an entire year, this is more than 500 hours where you need a gas fleet larger than 15 gigs to meet the demand in Germany, even with this very huge new renewable package. So this is definitely not a negligible number of hours, because 5%, as I said, is across the entire year. And if you focus obviously only on January, so then you get even higher figures. So this is the average gas generation in January 2030 under the different scenarios. And again, we see the same thing we have observed for the coal scenarios, that if you add more renewables, so if you look at this scenario here in the bottom right, the bearish weather years require less gas, just as they require less coal on average, versus the base case and versus the only electrification case. But the bullish year remains almost unchanged. So in the bullish year, the average for January month in the most bullish year, which is this 1997 in the example we have considered, will still require an average gas fleet of around 14 gigs average. This means that a lot of hours will actually increase by far 15 gigs and go towards 20 gigs of gas required in a January month. So this is really consistent with what we expected, but that is showing that really not all the problems are solved, and there is still a lot of need for gas asset, even in the most extreme scenarios. So I want to talk to you about now UK, Great Britain, because actually that is a very nice example. Great Britain, as you know, is a country that at the moment relies a lot on gas, more than Germany and France. So together with Netherlands is, as we've seen in the chart earlier, the country in Europe that relies the big country in Europe that relies the most on gas. And here we can see we have measured the average gas-fired generation in January 23 versus January 2030. And so these two charts actually tells a lot of stories. I will try to comment on some of these stories. So here you can see all the weather paths. So the gas generation under the different weather paths, and this in solid red, that's the average. So here you can clearly see that only during weekends really you have. So these will be the weekends. Only during the weekends in 2023 you will have a gas generation dropping down to zero. Apart from that, even in the most bearish weather years, during weekday you don't manage to go down to zero, because you still have a demand pattern which will sustain sort of base load gas generation. And the average here is around 14-15 gigs. So in 2030, what happens is that the average is much lower, as we expect, because of all the new wind which will come in UK in 2030. But the dispersion is much larger, and so you can see that you almost don't have any weekday pattern at all. All what matters is if there's going to be wind or not wind. A lot of wind in the days where there is wind, or zero wind in the days where there is no wind. And essentially in the days where there is no wind, which are these kind of extreme scenarios, you will need more than, you see, these are daily averages. So on average, you have days with more than 30 gigs of gas fleet needed, which now in 2023, you never pass that threshold. So you never pass that 30 threshold right now, and you will pass that quite often in daily resolution in 2030. So the extreme will become a lot extreme, and on the other side, the average will go down. So the same story is told here in the charts on the left. So you can see here we calculated the percentage of hours with need of gas fleet larger than 20 or 25 gigs or 30 or 35 gigs in January 23 or in January 2030. And then here you see that a lot more uniform distribution here on the top two charts, so 20 and 25 gigs. So you need kind of relatively steady across the different weather scenarios, at least 20 gigs. Here you start to see a lot more scattered across the weather years, already at this kind of relatively small gas fleet size. And what you can see is that the more you increase the gas fleet, the more you get the bullish years to still appear in this chart. So here you have a non-negligible amount of hours, so 2, 3, up to 5% of the hours, where you will need, in hourly resolution, a gas fleet larger than 35 gigs, which is something you never see actually in the current winter or on next winter. So basically, this is to say that the extreme will become more extreme, and actually the need for an asset like gas will not decrease, but increase under certain circumstances, obviously, not on average, but as a peak loader, the need of gas will increase. So we say it moves even more from base load to peak load. And then, as we go to the end of this presentation, I want to present you all what this leads in terms of flexible assets. So even with a renewable capacity being installed, being 2 to 3 times larger than the peak demand, even though, I mean, on paper you have all the possibility to cover the peak demand, the renewable generation will not meet the full net demand in each individual hour. And so for this reason, we get this concept of flexible asset, which in this model, on purpose, we have decided not to, not to qualify. So flexible asset can be new gas peakers, can be batteries, obviously, can be hydrogen, can be different kind of measures that meet the net demand, where the net demand cannot be covered by otherwise base load supply or net imports. And our modeling allows to measure or to deduce the capacity that we will need for flexible asset in 2030. So in ICON, we present this chart here in monthly resolution. So you can see in monthly resolution, it doesn't look too high. So in 2030, in Germany, for example, we see an average monthly across weather scenarios of 200 meg. We say, okay, that's nothing. But now I will tell you a lot more about this story, because already you can see that across weather years, this 200 meg, which is this one here, which is this base case here, this 200 meg for a month of January, will have a variability in terms of average monthly from close to zero, to close to 1 gig. But now in the next slide, we will see what this means in hourly resolution. But still, so this is the base case, but in the scenarios which we have run now with more renewables and more electrification, this gets obviously more extreme, because more electrification and more renewable just increase the number of hours where we will need to rely on flexible asset. And what this flexible asset need, where I have this chart here, which we also find on ICON. This is the generation by type in the now famous weather year 1997, which is one of the most bullish weather years. And here, the flexible asset is this part here in light blue, where you have maxed out pretty much every other technology. You have maxed out the import. And remember that you cannot probably go a lot more than that, because if there is a low wind, the wind here is the brownish part. If there is low wind in Germany, there is low wind also in the neighboring countries, so you cannot import a lot more than that. So then you need a flexible asset to cover the demand there. And so you can say, okay, how much is these hours where you actually do need this? And across the entire 2030, this is really not much. You can say, okay, that's 1 to 2%. Well, but 1 to 2% across the entire 2030 is not actually a negligible amount. And as soon as you put just a bit less conservative estimate on electrification or renewables, you get immediately much larger need for flexible assets. So up to 5% of the hours, depending on the different weather scenarios. And obviously, if you focus on the January month, this 2 to 3% gets rapidly up to 10% of the hours. And in the electrification scenario, that goes towards 30% of the hours. So this is really, we are starting to talk about big numbers very, very rapidly. So this is really not negligible. And you can say, okay, how big is the magnitude of the flexible asset that you need in a country like Germany? And well, if you take the max need observed in 2030 across the different cases, across the different scenarios, you get up to 35 gigs of flexible asset. You can say, okay, but this is just an outlier. I mean, don't give me the outlier hour. And so we have decided to remove this sort of 1%. So even assuming that the tightest 1% of the hours across a year, so which means roughly 90 hours, even assuming that you can manage that by some demand-side management, and even if you remove that, so you can take the 99th percentile, which is the one that you observe here in the bottom right, then you are still left with, under this rest boost plus electrification, which is probably the most likely scenario according to the new plan, you are still left across different weather scenarios with a flexibility need larger than 10 gigs, so between 10 and 12 gigs in Germany, assuming that you can handle these extreme peak loads of 30 gigs or 35 gigs that you observe in very little percent of the hours, so in 1% of the hours. And if you focus again on January, so what happens in a January month, and you focus again on the number of hours, so instead of focusing on the magnitude, you focus again on the percentage of hours with need of flexible asset larger than 5 or 10 or 15 gigs or 20 gigs, what you see is that you have a non-negligible number of hours where you need flexibility larger than 15 gigs. So non-negligible means across the January month, you get across the different weather years, you get up to 6% of the hours in January where you need more than 15 gigs of flexible asset. So this means that these are not really outliers. So because you can think that you need some system that has some sort of quick storage filling between one tight episode and the next. Because when you start talking about 5-6%, then you means really that you need 15 gigs today, and you can need 15 gigs again in 2 days from now. So this is really a bit scary at the moment, and this is where really we believe that this detailed approach, this detailed modeling can really add value to the policymakers and to the planners that need to plan the system in 2030, because this is really sort of going into detail of what can happen in practice. And now, before closing, I want to just briefly show you the other side of the coin, which is what we call curtailment. So under these high renewable scenarios, there will be an increasing number of hours in which the renewable generation potential is higher than the demand and will have to be curtailed. So obviously, we don't really believe in practice that this will be curtailed, as it happens right now, for example. But we believe that there will be systems to store these, especially because curtailment is, as you can see here, is a lot more seasonal and a lot more predictable across weather years, because it's more related to solar strong hours than to wind. So it's more predictable, so you can put system in place to save basically this. And but the amount of that we were surprised to see is really non-negligible. So in scenarios with renewable boosts, so with all these new solar deployed, so these 600 gigs of solar across European Union deployed, you will get up to 40-45 TWh of curtailment in Germany only. And then we have studied that also across other countries. So really, so if you ask me, okay, what should I bring away home to this from this webinar, I think this picture here on the right summarize a lot of the current energy transition problem. So basically, you have this picture here shows in hourly resolution, so hour by hour in 2030 from January to December in the base case, so without assuming super aggressive renewable deployment, what happens across the different weather scenarios and in hourly resolution. And so this, you can see the magnitude of the curtailment across different weather scenarios, and in red, in strong red here is the average. So you see the average I mean, doesn't mean much because you're averaging a lot of zero, but individual weather years can go up to 30 or 40 gigs all the time, basically. And on the other side, you have a lot of need of flexibility in the winter months. So basically, we have tried this kind of theoretical exercise of putting these two pictures together and taking this minus this one here and averaging out in monthly resolution. And so you have kind of deficit stronger deficit in the winter months and surplus in the summer months, starting from March, April already. So this is obviously theoretical because at the moment you don't have storage system that can store the energy for so many months. But basically allowing seasonal storage, leveraging this seasonal storage potential is really crucial to tackle in the correct way this energy transition problem, because you can have day-by-day variability, but then you have to look at this macro seasonal scale and basically with batteries alone that charge and discharge across days or weeks, that's not enough to solve the problem. You need really to store these and to deploy it there somehow. So, and finally, final slide, I just want to close about the importance of modeling with real weather scenarios versus modeling only using normal weather. So if I tell you, okay, using normal weather, so using normal average, wind and solar forecast from 91 to 2020 and pushing the normal forward, you can see that you observe pretty much zero curtailment and zero need for flexible asset. And this is the max need for flexible asset and max curtailment observed under each of the individual weather scenarios. So this is really not enough to capture the extreme cases, which are the testimony of what really can happen in practice. But not only considering the extreme, even considering the need for gas fleet. If you model using normal weather, you will never need a gas fleet larger than 15 gigs, for example, in January 2030. But this is completely not the case, because you can see that actually the need is there in a non-negligible number of hours under several of the weather years. So this is really testimony of why it's important to model things in a proper way and in a detailed way, and basically there is no shortcut to that. So yeah, so I just want to leave Natalie some conclusions.
Good. Okay, so if we summarize today, starting from our winter outlook, the important takeaways are that yes, we will need gas, and most likely more gas than in the previous 2 years for this winter, because we have a smaller baseload supply. We also, at the same time, expect Germany to be a net exporter despite the lower supply of baseload power all throughout the winter in pretty much in every possible weather scenario. Then we learned that the gas burn is very strongly vulnerable to the weather outcome that we have, and that if we have deviations from the normal, just within the month, the gas demand forecast can vary by 10% very quickly, but possibly even more. So, and our recession scenario taught us that, yes, we would have a possible impact on the power prices of 7%, even under a strong recession. The gas demand, though, it would decrease by a proportional amount, so 5% power demand reduction, 5% gas burn reduction as well.
Yes, and when it comes to the longer term, we can see that under this new renewable Easter package and Repower EU package, while the overall tightness or the average tightness decrease, the amount of individual hours that are very tight actually doesn't decrease, and actually on the opposite probably increase if you add the electrification factor to that. And as a consequence, the reliance of the German gas fleet remains very high, even in 2030, as other technologies will be phased out. So either in total, as we have seen in some scenarios, or partially, but still like this leaves almost unchanged the need for the gas fleet. And the third point is that under the proposed stronger renewable target, German need for additional flexibility. So here is additional on top of what is already accounted for, will be of at least 10 gigs, even by removing the 1% tightest hours. So this is, I think, really the result I would like to focus on as a key point of this presentation. And finally, under a renewable boost scenario with heavier focus on solar, as the one we have seen modeled in our exercise, the excess generation in the summer months needs to serve as energy storage potential for the tight hours in the winter. There is really little way to go away from this key lesson. So on that, I want to thank you a lot for listening to us. And yes, we are always, here is our mail address, but yeah, you find all the contact information in icon. And I can see here we have already some questions, Natalie. Yeah, we have, I think, a few minutes to start answering to some of them, and then we can sort out the other by mail. So the first question is about solving for optimal capacity mix. So how do you capture dynamics where supernormal profit attracts new entrants? Yeah, I mean, as I said, this is not a capacity model. I mean, that's more a model I would use for modeling 2040 or 2050. So in 2030 is more or less written in the law what will be deployed by then, and then there will be all this new flexibility needed, which will attract, as you said correctly in the question, new entrants. But we leave that technology neutral or technology agnostic, I prefer to say, in this modeling, because it's not. I mean, it's not part of a stack model to identify the best technology. That there you need completely different consideration based on the cost of each technology, on the LCOE or different technologies. Our goal in terms of like stack model is to identify the need of that, the frequency and the magnitude of this frequency, which is what we have focused in this presentation. What will be the outlook for the European carbon in the recession scenarios? That I think we're going to have a carbon webinar on that in 2 weeks, where a similar scenario will be presented, and most likely the carbon team will be able to answer to that scenario. And to that exact scenario, yeah. I'm relatively sure. So the carbon team will answer to a scenario, the price, carbon allowance price under recession scenarios. Mm-hmm. So third question: have you modeled below 1 hour hourly generation for the gigawatt of gas generation that would be needed? And if so, was it significantly larger?
I believe this is about very short ramp up of gas power, which we don't.
Yeah, we don't model under the hourly. No. At the moment, we don't. We model essentially the day-ahead market in hourly resolution. We don't aim to model the intraday, the quarter hourly resolution. And yeah, so that question. So. Finally, I'm sorry, will the gas demand be higher even if coal and nuclear retirement is deferred? So we have decided in this presentation not to run a scenario on nuclear retirement deferred. I mean, we thought about that, and in the beginning this was on the table, but then really that pretty quickly in late March, early April already disappeared, and the minister and the relative TSO, they said it's not technically a possibility. at least in Germany. I mean, in other countries, in Belgium, we have seen that there has been a deferred retirement, and that is what we have in the model right now. But in Germany, we have not modeled that. We have modeled a deferred call retirement, as Natalie said. You find that report. You find 2 reports actually, which we wrote on that under our publication page in Icon. And I gave a presentation on that 1 month ago. You can find also those slides there. And it was a Refinitiv webinar as a response to the Ukraine war. And but there is 2 publications on that.
Yes.
So that quantifies exactly how much larger gas demand will be in the case of deferred coal retirement.
Yes, one is deferred coal retirement, and the other one is a return of already decommissioned coal plants. And you can find that on Icon under publications in detail, both for the gas demand and also for the emission impact.
Exactly. Yes. And finally, question 5: what do you feel about Russian flows of gas into the EU for the rest of 2023? Yes, so Natalie mentioned that this is one of the reasons why we believe our model is currently bearish. I mean, that's not been always the case. So we have checked, we have been neutral basically until beginning of March for Q4 and Q1 23. And then we have turned slightly bearish, slower with the time. The more the increased risk premium on that is priced in the market, and we don't manage to price that in the model, because this is exactly risk premium. Is not fundamentally driven. We want to price what is fundamentally driven in our model, not the risk premium due to totally unknown events. But that is, we are totally agree, that is one very important unknown, and so as Natalie said, this is what is driving. Actually, we believe that is one of the key factors that is driving the Q4 price and the Q1 23 price higher than fundamentally judged price.
Yeah. And it is I still consider to be the base case scenario that there will be gas for the power sector. We are not building in any restrictions here in our modeling, and that's currently not the assumption. But yeah, as you said, a risk that we cannot really fully ignore.
No, totally. Okay, I think we are running a bit out of time. We are already 3 minutes past the hour. So we would like to thank you, all of you, for listening into this webinar. We will share slides and recording later on. So thank you all, and have a nice continuation of your afternoon.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye.